Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to Big Bear Bend. You may have noticed that my voice has changed. I assure you this is of no concern. Though things behind the screen here at the channel continue to be hectic and unpredictable, I, Ravencrest, have come to be your sultry guide through these next few episodes. Jackal themselves may return at a later date, though, if you prefer my voice, they will maintain the role of gathering footage, researcher, and scripter. And now, before you lies the fields and valleys of Maple Leaf Wildlife Park. Ordinarily, I expect that you saw this map once while completing the tutorial for this game and then turned your back on it, never to consider it again. But its natural beauty and ease of building space access makes it a prime candidate for a small, simple zoo like the one we will be starting today. Therefore, I give you, dear viewer, Big Bear Bend. The wildlife sanctuary has but a singular focus: to educate guests and the world about the beauty, danger, and lives of the world's bear populations. Our zoo features 6 species of bear, as well as 2 other species who share the name of bear, but are not bears themselves. As we grow the park, we will speak of each animal in its individual terms, with today focusing on one of the most famous and misunderstood bears, the Great Northern Polar Bear. You see now, on screen, that we are breaking ground on this enormous enclosure, and Jukal spent multiple coffee breaks hemming and hawing about how precisely to create the frozen wonderlands these bears require. Many of you know, of course, that polar bears require a truly expansive enclosure, and this, of course, has come with many controversies. There are few real-world zoos equipped to house polar bears. However, this has not stopped less scrupulous zoos from attempting the feat. Many of the earliest enclosures were truly pathetic, being only a small concrete paddock with a simple puddle to provide for all their water needs. This was especially true of the very earliest zoos, from the 1850s to the 1920s. You see, the failure of humans to understand animals allowed them to presume that they needed only a simple cage, food, and water to truly thrive, as they did not consider animals any better than, say, a tree or a cloud. Fortunately, others spent this time truly studying the animals and discovering their habits, desires, and above all, their true needs, eventually leading to the AZA's high bar and exacting standards for modern polar bear keeping. Now, one of the most famous AZA-accredited zoos to still keep polar bears is the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, and it has earned this prestige through a combination of luck in the form of their natural environment and dedication to keeping these bears in the safest and healthiest manner possible. Now, unsurprisingly, this controversy was reflected in Planet Zoo itself when the bears were first released with the Arctic Pack, Planet Zoo's first DLC. Already a difficult sell with its highly themed Norse architecture, Christmas decorations, and disturbingly small roster of animals, the DLC quickly gained notoriety as one of the community's least favorites, as new additions to the roster were entered. The polar bear had a huge paw to play in this. You see, upon release, their enclosure minimum requirements dedicated a whopping 6,000 meters squared to be allocated to these bears, with a further 2,000 meters of water. These were assuming a singular bear would inhabit the exhibit. Naturally, even more space would be required if you wished to add a mate into the enclosure. And you see, in this bizarre twist of fate, where the real world erred towards the unforgivably small, frontier developments erred towards the unmanageably large. To compound issues, the bears would tolerate next to no vegetation, so prospective keepers were tasked with making an enclosure that would house most zoos and fill it to the brim with rocks and water. Naturally, there was backlash. When checking the AZA's own required standards against the ones in Planet Zoo, we see that the AZA cites multiple other organizations for average minimum requirements. The aggregate data dictates that polar bears have an on-exhibit area of 500 meters squared of walking space, with an additional 150 meters squared per additional individual. a swimming area at least 70 meters squared, with a depth between 1.5 and 3 meters deep, and an offstage area of 75 meters squared, with an additional 15 meters squared per additional individual, with additional space allocated for cubbing dens. Combined, we see that even the AZA doesn't recommend the expansive space that Planet Zoo initially demanded, or continues to demand even now. However, Frontier was not without its logic, and so we will come back to these requirements momentarily. It will come as no surprise then to discover that Frontier eventually reduced the keeping requirements for polar bears down to 3,250 meters squared for the enclosure space, with 720 meters squared of water space. Truly, though, still ridiculous compared to the relatively small sizes that modern zoos do use. Well, anyway. Now, why then does Planet Zoo demand so much space to be given to these animals? For that, we have to consider their wild habits. Unlike other bear species, polar bears are not territorial, and instead live in migratory lives that take them across the entire Arctic. Though their walking speed is a slow and plodding 3 miles an hour, they are able to cross vast swaths of land across an entire year. One particularly well-traveled female that we know of managed to navigate from Alaska to Greenland and back again in a singular year. That is journeying around 4,800 kilometers, or 2,980 miles. Though she may have traveled further simply due to navigational requirements, cubbing dens belonging to the female in both Alaska and Greenland indicate that she was breeding in both of those locations, telling us that the genetic diversity pool is not limited to specific areas, but potentially the entire Arctic region. Now, obviously, it is impossible to replicate migratory patterns in captivity. Even if a zoo were to have 2 enclosures on opposite ends of the zoo, with a bridge uniting them open seasonally, this would only be a short jaunt compared to these massive treks that they often would do. It would also be a huge sink of resources and long-term maintenance. Frontier made it clear that when they initially designed the polar bear, their focus was on managing habitat space, a natural conclusion when considering these truly extensive migratory patterns. We at Big Bear Bend instead opted for a different angle, meeting the minimum Frontier requirements while also attempting to meet AZA's guidelines in terms of required features. Our polar bear habitat boasts both an indoor housing unit and an outdoor run, with a large cubbing den built into the snow, which the bears may choose to access at their own leisure. We have endeavored to make sure that all areas are viewable to the public so they can best understand the seasonal behaviors of our polar bears, while also striving to minimize the negative impact this 24/7 viewing may have on the bears. You see, our indoor area is designed to model an ice cavern. The bears have been given a small swimming pool with appropriate toys, as well as raised bedding locations and icy stalagmites and stalactites to replicate a wet cave environment. Of course, these additions pose no real threat to the bears' safety, and they simply enjoy the enrichment. The outdoor run is sunk below the average level of the zoo for better containment, as well as water management. The land area is covered in snow and ice, replicating the natural environment of the bears, but giving way to a natural pool fed by the local river. The run also grants access to the cubbing den, a large underground cave similar in style and structure to their indoor area, and because of our location, our bears are occasionally limited to the indoor building, depending on their weather. However, generally, they have full access to indoor and outdoor facilities at their discretion, as is recommended by the AZA. Of course, once construction is complete, we will tour the full enclosure. Though space is always a primary concern when talking about these bears, it is, of course, not the only thing worth talking about. So let's now turn our attention towards biology. Polar bears are by far one of the most adapted species of current bears. Their profile is highly distinct, with a long snout framing a wedge-like face, small ears, and a powerful build. Polar bears are instantly recognizable. However, because of their many adaptations, it is unlikely you would see one coming in the wild. Their fur is not actually white. It is clear, with the insides of the hair follicles being hollow. This allows the bear to appear white as light reflects off of their coat, while allowing heat to travel through the thick coat and down to the skin, which is black to maximize the heat absorption. This provides the perfect camouflage in their icy tundra home. Though their eyes and nose are black, the bears have been known to cover their faces with snow to further reduce their visibility. Keep in mind, they also do this to clean the blood off of their faces. The shape of the head is also highly specific for their lifestyle. These bears are semi-aquatic, practically mandatory if one wishes to live in the Arctic on drifting icebergs. With very little terrestrial prey available, polar bears prioritize hunting seals and fish, diving deep into the water or hunting across the seals' nesting and resting grounds. Despite being an apex predator on land, their semi-aquatic lifestyle brings them dangers in the ocean, where orcas and sharks can easily overtake them. The only threat they suffer above water comes from humans and other polar bears, although humans have a notoriously bad matchup. Polar bears are typically only actively hunted by humans for a handful of reasons. The first is for safety reasons. In Alaskan and Canadian tribal lands and on the island of Svalbard, the bears often come into conflict with human settlements, as these need to be near the water for fishing and clean water access. For this reason, guns are a mandatory safety requirement when traveling the area. However, this is not a guarantee of safety. The bear's excellent camouflage and surprising speed when running poses considerable threat, and their thick, fatty reserves can negate the initial shock of a bullet. It is likely that a single shot will not be enough to deter the bear before it can harm the human, and so it is recommended to travel in groups. Humans and bears can also come into conflict over hunting territories, as both rely on seals as a source of meat. Now, with this in mind, polar bears are rarely hunted for their resources. While their furs are warm, they are generally not worth the risk that a hunt poses. Their meat is also a less than valuable resource, as predator meat is far more likely to carry disease than prey meat. Their liver is an incredible source of iron, so incredible in fact, that the sheer quantity of iron it possesses is lethal to humans nearly 7 times over, so careful preparation by an experienced chef is required, much like eating a fugu fish, but in fact far more deadly than the neurotoxins that they produce. These are the only valuable resources a polar bear offers, and when compared to other Arctic prey, they are simply not valued. This is of course great news for the bears, as unlike other Arctic animals, this reduces the direct human detriments on their population. Of course, that is not to say they suffer no negative effects from humans. We are all aware how global warming is melting the ice caps and reducing polar bears' ability to migrate and navigate safely, as well as the overall impact to all Arctic animals. Sadly, these are set to continue for the foreseeable future, even if the entire human species were to turn its efforts to reducing climate change's negative effects. This is a long-term issue. Keep in mind, this has had unexpected consequences. As northern territory is reduced, polar bears have been pushed south into the territories of other bears, such as grizzlies. This should typically result in conflict between the two species. However, natural hybrids between polar and grizzly bear species have become more commonplace. This could be due to a lack of species-specific mates, an inability of the bears to distinguish between the species, or perhaps an active choice with a goal to preserve both species. Similar species-preserving behavior has been observed in African elephants, who over the course of the last 2 decades have shifted their mate preference away from individuals with long tusks, favoring shorter tusks as a preventative measure. This decreases the chance that future offspring will be poached for the ivory in the tusks. In terms of the polar grizzly hybrids, they appear to be genetically viable and capable of reproduction. And so, it is possible that this hybrid species will eventually gain footing as its own recognized genetic line, potentially becoming the inheritor of one or both species' legacies. This has been known to happen before, with human crossing, with Neanderthal being easiest of the comparisons that we can do. However, we at Big Bear Bend do not participate in nor endorse the active breeding of hybrid animals for any reason, whether or not it is occurring in the wild already. While the future of these animals remains uncertain, we at Big Bear Bend intend to educate our guests about these animals while we still have them. By the time we leave off, our female has successfully bred and is currently raising a healthy cub. Ordinarily, this would be joyous news. However, it should be noted that real-life conservation organizations do not promote the breeding of polar bears in captivity. Cubs generally do not survive for long under captive conditions, and cannot be released to the wild successfully, ever. It is our goal at the facility to raise and keep this cub as a healthy individual for the rest of its natural life, in hopes of better studying the bear's rearing habits, the habitat and veterinary needs of polar bears across life stages, and for other research and conservation purposes only. About now, the construction of our facility should be complete, so please enjoy the next few minutes while we discuss future plans for this zoo. Our goal is to build a facility that fully illustrates to guests not only the different bear species of the world, but also their needs and environmental impact. Our next episode will see us building a salmon exhibit, as salmon are as intrinsically linked to bears as plants to the sun. We will also be discussing future expansions, including a beekeeping farm, a bamboo forest, and an interactive den. Thank you for joining us on this debut of Big Bear Bend. We hope you come visit us again. Now, we here at Big Bear Bend care not if you like, comment, or subscribe. This video will happen, one way or another. And if you choose to be witness to the entire series, I applaud you. But ultimately, you are you. You do what you want to do. Good day. Combined, we see that even the AZA doesn't recommend the expansive spaces that these Planet Zoo initially... Where the fuck is my fucking mouse? Let's go. We have endeavored to make sure that all areas are viewable to the public so that they can best understand the seasonal... The bears have been given a small swimming pool with appropriate toys, as well as raised bedding locations and icy stalagmites and stalactites to replicate a... Similar species-preserving behavior has been observed in African elements. Cubs generally do not